So next topic is antidiabetic drugs. Diabetes mellitus is a metabolic disorder in which the carbohydrate metabolism is reduced but lipid and protein metabolism is increased. Metabolic disorder. Now what are the main features? Hyperglycemia, that is raised blood glucose level, loss of glucose in the urine, glycosuria, raised lipid levels, hyperlipidemia, negative nitrogen balance, and ketonemia can also occur. Now why these changes occur in the metabolism? What is a basic defect? It is reduced levels of the pancreatic hormone insulin. Its excretion is decreased. Insulin deficiency. Sometimes levels are normal, but the responsiveness of the target organs to insulin is less. The liver, fat cells and muscles, they are less responsive to the effects of insulin. That condition is known as insulin resistance. So in both conditions, either levels are low or the tissues are not responding, there is reduced effect of insulin which causes these metabolic disturbances. Cardinal features of diabetes mellitus are polyuria, mostly nocturnal polyuria, then polydipsia, excessive thirst, and polyphagia, that is excessive eating. Appetite is increased. Diagnostic criteria is the diagnostic test for diabetes is fasting blood glucose levels. As per the American Diabetes Association, a level of 126 milligrams per deciliter is considered as diabetic. In millimoles, we can say 7 millimoles per liter, and it is to be done on more than one occasion. Single value is not diagnostic. If repeatedly it comes out to be more than one, then we say patient is diabetic. Or random glucose levels of 200 milligrams per deciliter or 11.1 millimoles per liter. They are helpful in diagnosing the diabetes mellitus. So this level is important, 126 milligrams per deciliter. But if patient has symptoms, then even a single value of 126 is diagnostic. Another important thing in the diagnosis of diabetes is glycated hemoglobin or glycosylated hemoglobin, HbA1c. Now what happens is that the hemoglobin gets glycated at its valine amino acid terminal, and the rate of glycosylation is directly proportional to the concentration of glucose in the blood. So more is the glucose, more will be the glycosylated hemoglobin, and it gives an average level over 120 days, that is the lifespan of RBCs, that is 3 months, an average control of glucose, or and it is a snapshot of average glucose level over past 3 months. There is variation in the levels, but for most of the labs 4 to 5.9% is considered within normal limits, and a value 6.5% is the cutoff for diagnosis of diabetes. The main purpose of glycated hemoglobin is to check the glycemic control in the diabetic patients. If the levels are below 7%, it is said that control is good. But if it exceeds 8% in a diabetic patient, it is said that glycemic control is poor and there need to be some change in his treatment. Dosage is to be increased or further measures or change of drug, like that. So glycated hemoglobin for diagnosis as well as to see the glycemic control in a proven case of diabetes, whether his glycemic control is good or poor. So for the diagnosis, HbA1c 6.5% and blood glucose levels 126 milligrams per deciliter. They give us the diagnosis of diabetes. Various types, as you might be familiar with, one is type 1 insulin dependent diabetes mellitus, that is, it can be treated only with insulin. The name is self explanatory, diabetes which can be treated only with insulin. Type 2 non insulin dependent diabetes mellitus, it can be treated even without insulin. These are common, everybody is familiar. Then we can say type 3 is secondary diabetes or hyperglycemia secondary to some other diseases, chronic pancreatitis, or secondary to some drugs like glucocorticoids, thiazide diuretics, the vasodilator drug diazoxide, and the growth hormones. There are many others. Type 4 is during pregnancy, gestational, GDM, gestational diabetes mellitus, because the placental hormones cause insulin resistance. The responsiveness of the tissues to insulin is reduced. Hence, sometimes in second or third trimester, there occur diabetes and it resolves in the postpartum period. So, sort of gestational diabetes is self-limiting, will be resolved after the delivery. Secondary diabetes or secondary hyperglycemia needs treatment of the condition which has caused this, or in case of drugs, the dosage adjustment as much as is possible can be done for controlling the hyperglycemia. And we will discuss in detail the treatment of IDDM and non-IDDM. What are the basic differences between these two types? Though this is mainly the concern of medicine, but just briefly, in type 1, it is usually juvenile. Sometimes non obese adults or elderly may get, but it is juvenile patients, children. Whereas in type 2, it is usually the obese adults or adolescents. Obese adults type 2, non obese adults get type 1. The basic cause of type 1 is beta cell destruction, which is immune mediated. Now, when the beta cells, which are the say factory of synthesis of insulin, when they are destructed, definitely there will be deficiency of insulin secretion or no secretion. If the damage to beta cell is massive, no secretion of insulin, so treatment will be automatically replacement of insulin. Whereas deficiency of insulin or resistance to action of insulin is responsible for type 2. Pathogenesis in type 1, there is a genetic predisposition based on presence of HLA-DRA3 or DRA4. Autoaggression is there, that is immune response against the beta cells. Beta cells fail to respond to insulinogenic stimuli. There is stimulation in the form of food, in the form of raised glucose, which normally increases the insulin release from beta cells. But in type 1 diabetes, the beta cells are not responding to these stimuli. Insulin is absent, glucagon is raised. But here, the insulin is not totally absent, but the levels are subnormal. They are not adequate, or there is tissue resistance, insulin resistance. Tissues are not responding. Beta cells are responding to insulinogenic stimuli, but the response is deficient. Type 1, as is clear from the pathogenesis, that beta cells are destructed by immune mechanisms. It is more severe form and can get complicated in the form of ketoacidosis. Type 2 is less severe. So insulin is not there in type 1. Only answer for its treatment is replacement therapy with the hormone insulin. Whereas here dietary restriction, weight reduction, though these two measures, diet restriction, exercise and weight reduction, these are used in type 1 also. Non-pharmacological measures are used in both the types. But in type 2, we try to give oral anti-diabetic drugs. If patient is not improving, if the response is not appropriate, then insulin may be required. So type 1 and type 2 differ in their pathogenesis, in their severity, in the patient characteristics. So you will be reading these things in greater detail with your medicine in the next prof. What are the important complications? The most important and most severe being ketoacidosis. As we have already discussed, that it is more common in type 1 diabetes, especially those who are not controlled. Now in type 1, as you have seen in the pathogenesis, that insulin is absent. Beta cells are destructed by immune mechanisms. Insulin is absent. Now the major function of insulin is transport of glucose inside the cell. Major function of insulin is to transport the glucose from the plasma into the cell. So when insulin is not there, glucose cannot enter into the cell, especially skeletal muscles and body cells. Now as the cells are not getting glucose for energy, they start using fatty acids to produce ATP. Cells need energy. Whenever there is activity, skeletal muscles will need energy. Body cells will need energy for basal metabolism also, to support the basal metabolic rate. Now, normally that energy comes from carbohydrates or glucose. When these cells are not being able to use glucose, as insulin is not there, glucose is not being transported inside the cell. The thing is, we can put it that cells are deprived of glucose. They are starving in excess. There is excess of glucose present in the blood, but cells cannot use it as the glucose is not entering inside the cells. Hence, cells look out for an alternative source and they start using fatty acids to produce ATP. Now, you might have read in lipid metabolism in biochemistry in your first prof that when the fatty acids are used, the ketone bodies are released. Most important ones being acetyl CoA, acetoacetic acid, and beta hydroxybutyric acid. These are synthesized. Now, when cells are using excess of fatty acids, there is excess production of these acidic things, ketone bodies. This causes metabolic acidosis known as ketoacidosis. The acetoacetic acid gets converted to acetone, and this is exhaled out in the lungs, through the lungs. Hence, in a patient with ketoacidosis, there is fruity odor in his breath, fruity odor of acetone. Glycosuria is there. There is renal excretion of nitrogenous substances and these ketone bodies. So all these things together with them carry the water. So osmotic diuresis due to excretion of glucose, nitrogenous substances and ketone bodies. Hence excess water is lost, dehydration and polydipsia. Metabolic acidosis due to acidic products, acetoacetic acid, beta hydroxybutyric acid. Body pH is blood pH is decreased, coma and death can occur. Now you need to understand this pathogenesis or the metabolic changes which are occurring. The reason behind is deficiency of insulin or absence of insulin, failure of entry of glucose into the body cells. Cells are surviving in excess. In excess means excess of glucose is present in the blood, but cells are not being able to use. Hence, for energy, they look forward towards the fatty acids, break down the fatty acids into these ketone bodies. These ketone bodies give fruity odor. These ketone bodies lead to dehydration. They lead to acidosis, coma, and death. So, in treatment, we will try to treat like that. We will try to treat acidosis. We will bring the pH towards normal. We will give fluids for the treatment of dehydration, and we will try to treat the basic cause, insulin. Insulin replacement, fluid replacement, and treatment of acidosis will be done. So this is a very important question. Treatment of ketoacidosis or management of ketoacidosis for theory as well as a prescription. We'll discuss in detail. So first and foremost in the complications, though it is not very common in type 2, it is common in type 1 and it is precipitated by any sort of stress, infection, trauma, surgery. Any sort of stress may precipitate ketoacidosis. Other complications, there can occur hyperosmolar coma. It is more common in type 2 diabetes. There is severe hyperglycemia and dehydration. The microvascular complications, though the pathogenesis and all those things will be discussed by pathology and medicine people, but just for the sake of completion of important complications of diabetes, retinopathy and nephropathy due to sorbitol accumulation, basement membrane of the capillary endothelium is thickened, and there is neuropathy due to demyelination of the axons. Macrovascular complications like dyslipidemias, cataract, atherosclerosis, etc. So till now we have discussed what diabetes mellitus is, why the metabolic changes occur, why the metabolism of carbohydrates is reduced and that of proteins and lipids is increased, and what are the diagnostic features and how the thing gets complicated to cause various conditions. So such a condition must be managed. What is the treatment? There is slight difference in the treatment of type 1 and type 2, though non-pharmacological measures remain the same. This is a lifestyle disease. Diabetes mellitus is a disease due to defective lifestyle, basically. So lifestyle modification is the basis of treatment. Some patients may improve or may get controlled with these non-pharmacological measures only, dietary restriction and exercise for the weight reduction. These two, this seems to be very simple, but it is not very easy to modify the lifestyle. It's not easy to change from pizza burgers and start eating salads and like that. It's a difficult thing. Weight reduction is easy to say than difficult to achieve, but is definitely needed in both types of diabetes. Then in type 1 the mainstay of treatment is insulin replacement, whereas in type 2 oral anti-diabetics. Now why we keep on stressing the word oral? Because these can be given by oral route, whereas insulin being a protein cannot be used by oral route. It is administered by parenteral routes. Now nowadays there are various other routes and various, say, delivery systems, different delivery systems which are easier than the parenteral, that is subcutaneous injections. So that is why we always prefix antidiabetics oral ones. Otherwise insulin is also anti-diabetic. uh, so like that. So insulin, which is the hormone, which is an endogenous substance, but in type 1 diabetes and in some complicated cases or refractory cases of type 2 diabetes, we will use it as a drug. So first we will discuss the physiology of insulin secretion. Again, these things are just a repetition of whatever you have seen in your first prof, but uh, because the mechanism of action of drugs, yes, can be explained only if you know the mechanism of secretion of insulin. So physiology of insulin secretion, there are many stimuli which increase the insulin secretion. Basal secretion 1 unit per hour continues, and there are various chemical, neural and hormonal stimuli for insulin secretion. Chemical stimuli, glucose is first and foremost the most important stimuli for insulin secretion is glucose. Raised levels of glucose, they stimulate insulin secretion. Amino acids, fatty acids and food. Neural stimuli, alpha 2 stimulation decreases, but muscarinic and beta 2 stimulation increases the insulin release. So cholinergic as well as adrenergic stimulation increases insulin release. But alpha 2, if you remember, alpha 2 receptors were presynaptically present and they were inhibitory in nature. When they are stimulated, the decreased levels of norepinephrine, so decreased beta 2 stimulation. When the alpha 2 is stimulated, beta 2 will be less stimulated because norepinephrine has decreased. If you can understand, it is okay. Otherwise just remember, both cholinergic as well as adrenergic stimulation, muscarinic and beta 2, both increase insulin release. Hormonal stimuli, there are many, but glucagon increases insulin secretion and somatostatin decreases the insulin secretion. Now try to understand this diagram, which explains the role of glucose, indirectly food, because carbohydrates get converted into glucose, and it briefly hints at the mechanism of action of sulfonylureas also. We will classify the drugs later. These are all one of the important anti-diabetic drugs. So they act through this mechanism. This is basically a diagram explaining the mechanism of secretion of insulin and how it is affected by various stimuli. Now this is a pancreatic beta cell. Here are present glucose transporter type 2. Here are present the potassium channels which are regulated by ATP. ATP regulated potassium channel, that is, when ATP is there, it will close the channel. Regulates means try to concentrate on this point, that potassium channel regulated by ATP is present in the beta cell, which is closed by ATP. Otherwise, when ATP levels are normal, when ATP levels are low, this channel remains open, and when ATP levels are high, this channel closes. So beta cell of the pancreas having glucose transporter 2 for moving the glucose from plasma into the beta cell. Then there are ATP regulated potassium channels which are closed by ATP. And then there are voltage sensitive calcium channels. There is insulin present inside these cells. So what happens is, when this is a resting cell or in the fasting state, when the levels of ATP are low, channel remains open. Channel remains open. Potassium moves according to its concentration gradient from inside the cell to outside, and the membrane remains fully polarized. Membrane maintains its negativity because potassium is moving out through these ATP regulated. The name of the channel is, full name of this channel is ATP regulated potassium channel, right? So normally when ATP levels in the resting cell are low, channel remains open, potassium moves along its concentration gradient, from inside it moves out, and membrane remains polarized. After the meals, when glucose enters into the beta cell through glucose transporter, glucose T for transporter, 2 is the form. Glucose transporter 2 causes the entry of glucose into the cell, beta cell of pancreas, where it is metabolized. So whenever glucose is metabolized, there is increase in the levels of ATP. ATP is generated. This ATP causes closure of the potassium channels. The flow of potassium stops when these channels are closed by ATP. The flow of potassium stops. Now when the flow stops, membrane gets depolarized. The membrane potential will move towards positive. Depolarization of the membrane due to closure of potassium channel. Now when the membrane gets depolarized, calcium channels open up as they are voltage sensitive. Calcium enters in, intracellular calcium concentration is increased. Intracellular calcium concentration is increased, which causes exocytosis of insulin and release of insulin. Is the scheme clear? Resting membrane, potassium channels remain open, potassium keeps on moving as per its concentration gradient from inside to outside, and membrane remains polarized. Entry of glucose through glucose transporter 2 and metabolism of glucose generates ATP. The channel closes, potassium flow stops, membrane gets depolarized. Depolarization of the membrane opens calcium channels. Calcium enters inside the cell. Raised intracellular calcium causes destabilization of this membrane and exocytosis of insulin. Thus, insulin is secreted. We say glucose is the most important insulinogenic stimulus. Now, what happens is, so any other thing which can close the potassium channel will also bring about these three changes. Anything which blocks these potassium channels or closes these ATP regulated potassium channels will increase intracellular calcium and cause insulin secretion. So such thing is sulfonylurea. They block these potassium channels and depolarize the membrane of the beta cells. So this is an important diagram. If you have a question on mechanism of action of sulfonylureas, you will need to draw this diagram and explain properly. We will refer to this diagram again in with oral antidiabetics. So glucose transported into beta cells through GLUT2 in a flowchart, the same things. Metabolized, ATP levels are raised, ATP regulated